Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Now, my maths is pretty rubbish. My logic is pretty good, but my maths is pretty rubbish. So I'm going to go over my theory here, and what I'd like for somebody who knows what they're doing to actually say, yes, that's okay, or no, you're a complete idiot, which I don't mind. Everybody's entitled to an opinion. Right, this is all to do with this. What has brought this on is that the Tazula company that supplied the K-Lite, I just can't get that. Somebody may be able to send that. But it suddenly dawned on me that First Rays actually does their version of K-Lite. In fact, was part and parcel of working with people to actually come up with that solution in the first place. So it was a good place to go and have a look at the website. Now, the downside immediately is that the lowest value they seem to sell of K-Lite is £2. That would last me 30 years with the amount of orchids I've got at the rate I want to feed. So that's a no-go. I'm not dealing with a £2 pack. So that's out. But digging into shipping on that site, there was a special note for Europeans. That's me. Actually, it's not anymore. I'm UK, we're separate. But the principle is sound. And what it basically says is that shipping over to us menials is out of order. So openly admitting that shipping to the EU is just too expensive. But what it does suggest is an alternative. And that alternative is based on using the rain mix, which is the original MSU formula, sort of, that's made by Orchids or sold by Orchids fundamentally in the EU. I had some of that once. It was an alternative to the versions in the States produced over here and therefore readily available and, well, easily posted prior to Brexit. But there is actually a guy who sells it in the UK, if ever I wanted anyway. But anyway, the advice was, using that as a basis, you could make your own K-Lite, which wouldn't be perfect, but it would be a pretty good, close approximation. But unfortunately, it was based on weight. And guess what the ingredients were? Rain mix, i.e. MSU, calcium nitrate and Epsom salts. That's exactly what I've been working with and thinking of. But it was based on weight. Now, I haven't got suitable scales, weighing mechanisms to deal with those sort of low volumes that I'd be talking about. So I can't do it by weight. So I've come up with this. Right. This is the basis. This is what I've got. My MSU feed, we've got 13% nitrogen, 3% whatever P is. My brain's gone. That's because that's empty. And 15% potassium, which is the problem. It's these two we're trying to get rid of or reduce down percentage-wise. But then we've got the 8% calcium, 2% magnesium. I've got calcium nitrate. That's 24% calcium, 18% nitrogen. I've got Epsom salts, 16% magnesium, 32% sulfur. Not too keen on that bit. And I've also got CalMag, which we'll disregard because it won't work. Right. So, irrespective of the volume of water, because the volume of water is irrelevant. It's the parts per million that's important, yeah? So if I chuck some of my MSU in some water and get 50 parts per million, within that 50 parts per million is the said makeup. Nothing's changed, has it? You know, if it was 1,000 parts per million, the percentages would be the same. Is my logic sound at this point? I certainly hope so, otherwise the rest is going to go out the window. Right, so if I then we're talking, let's say we had 50 parts per million of my MSU feed. If I then added calcium nitrate and took the TDS value up to 100 parts per million, yeah, I've added 13% of nitrogen. Sorry, I've added 18% of nitrogen, coming back over here, yeah, calcium nitrate, 18% nitrogen, to my 13% that I already had. So I've now got 31% nitrogen in that volume of water. I haven't changed the volume of water, don't forget. And my calcium has gone from 8% from the MSU, plus the 24% of the calcium nitrate, that's gone up to 32%. Yeah, which is a bit high given that that's now the same value as the nitrogen. But plants, it's an immobile element, calcium, so it's going to go into the plant and stick to various places and not move around. So it's probably acceptable. And then let's say I added in Epsom salts and took it up to 150 parts per million. So to my 2% magnesium of my MSU, I've now added in 16% magnesium from my Epsom salts, and that takes me up to 18% magnesium. So my new values, I've now got 150 parts per million, don't forget, 3 lots of my original, adding in calcium nitrate, adding in Epsom salts. We're now up to 150 parts per million. We've got 31% nitrogen. The P and the K haven't changed, have they? So relative to the nitrogen, they're now a lot lower than they were before. Calcium's gone up to 32%, that's too high. Magnesium has gone up to 18%, which relative to the calcium is wrong, because it should be about a quarter to a third, not half. So then we come over here and we start playing a bit. Yeah. So we can forget all that now. So we start off in our given volume of water with a TDS of 50 parts per million, which gives us our initial MSU values. Right. Then we add in another 50 parts per million of calcium nitrate, which we know the values of, and then we add in another 50 parts per million of our Epsom salts, which is what we've just done and discussed. But the Epsom salts, that takes the magnesium up too high. This is the bit I need the help with, because we were increasing the TDS by 50 parts per million for each of the additives. Now what I want to do is reduce one of the additives. So if we had 30 parts per million of Epsom salts, then it's less relative to the others, i.e. it's 3/5. So that's 16% of the original Epsom salts divided by 5 times 3 to give me the equivalent of 30 parts per million instead of 50, which comes out at 9.5, which is still a bit high. So if we increase the TDS by only 20 parts per million using the Epsom salts, that's 2/5. So we would have our 16% magnesium in Epsom salts divided by 5 multiplied by 3. That should be multiplied by 2. We can't even concentrate, can we? Now we're going to try and scribble and write left-handed. 2. I know what I meant, I just didn't write it down right. Yeah, so you can see what I'm getting at. 30 parts per million is 3/5 of 50. 20 parts per million is 2/5 of 50. So 16 over 5 times 2, which is 6.4. Now to me, that would be fine. So that would be 50 parts per million of MSU, 50 parts per million taking it up to 100 of calcium nitrate, and 20 parts per million of Epsom salts, taking it up to 120 parts per million. A nice low value feed. Yeah, and what we would have then is, coming back over here, we would have our nitrogen at MSU 13% plus 18% from calcium nitrate set at 31, like I said. The calcium would be the 8% out of MSU plus the 24% out of calcium nitrate, going up to 32. But our Epsom salts, instead of the 2% from MSU plus 16%, would now only be plus 6.4%. So relative to the others would be in balance. So the only problem I've got there is that the calcium is roughly the same as the nitrogen, which is not really where I want it. But looking at the K-Lite, if you look at their values, the K-Lite value has got nitrogen at 12% and calcium at 10%. So this is not that far off, is it? Open for discussion. Am I talking out of the proverbial? Is the logic of this bumping up 50 parts per million but reducing the Epsom salts to 20 parts per million, therefore only adding in 6.4% of magnesium relative to the others? Because if you think about it, it doesn't matter what volume of water you add Epsom salts into, there's always going to be 16% of magnesium. But it's relative. It's not definitive, it's relative to the other elements that were already there. So is this logic of bringing the TDS down from 50 for the Epsom salts to 20 a valid bit of maths? And if it is, I think I'm going to go in for Open University, because that all got worked out in my tiny little head after a full glass of white wine. And if I've been talking absolute rubbish, please tell me. You'll be struck off the list, but you'll feel good about it. So I could, with help from First Rays, that was the advice, was to go to the original MSU formula and play with calcium nitrate and Epsom salts and come up with a pretend K-Lite. And that would be my idea. Does that sound good? And all of this is only until K-Lite turns up in a parcel via Postman Pat at my front door, which I'm working on. Hard, not easy, but I'm working on it. So in the meantime, we will be doing this, unless somebody shouts this concept down, which I'm quite happy. I'm quite happy if somebody shouts that down and says, "You are talking absolute gobblers." So be it. But then if they explain why I'm talking cobblers, I may be able to make some adjustments and make it work, which would be the goal. So anyway, I hate maths. That's what calculators are for. But you can't say, well, that's all right, that's what calculators are for, because if you don't know which buttons to press and why, then you can't use it, can you? You have to know why. You have to know what you're trying to find out. So that's my theory, which I'm sticking to until somebody shouts me down. See you next time. Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. This is a go at making my own high nitrogen feed. Now I can do the high nitrogen bit, that's not a problem, relative to everything else, but it won't be as balanced as if I'd started with the K-Lite. So, TDS meter, imperative at this point. Right, MSU fertiliser is my start point, and I want this at 50 parts per million. That is next to nothing. The theory being that if that's 50 parts per million, 13% of that is nitrogen. Yeah? Unfortunately, 15% of it is potassium. which I don't want, but I can't get rid of it, I can't take it out. The idea with the K-Lite is that I wouldn't be putting it in the first place. Now luckily, virtually everything that's going in here dissolves pretty quickly, or we're going to be here all day. So we're starting with the MSU, and hopefully I haven't already put too much in, because we are going for a light feed here. So where are we up to then? That wasn't a bad guess, 43. I'm going to leave it at that. I don't want to spend hours doing this, and it doesn't have to be precise. So out of that parts per million of 43, bearing in mind the RO water was actually 10 of that, in amongst that is 13% nitrogen. Now I'm going to add some calcium nitrate, and I'm hoping now to take that from 43 up to about 80, or maybe between 70 and 80. That's my theory. If I go much higher than that, then I'm going to be overdosing on calcium, unfortunately, because remember that calcium nitrate is it's got more calcium in it than nitrogen. It's the nitrogen I'm trying to bump up, and again, luckily this stuff dissolves almost instantly, quite honestly. Right, so what have we done then? Not enough. That went from, we were on 43, it's gone to 59. So we need a little bit more of that. And this is where I have to go careful not to get the insides wet. So we'll add a little bit more. It's very difficult to judge this stuff because it's flakes. Well, there's big flakes and little flakes. And there's thin flakes and chunky flakes. There's all different sizes, that stuff. But I'd rather put too little in and have to add a little bit more, and just bump this up a little bit at a time as we go. The next bit is not going to be easy because it's the Epsom salts, and I think since I got this stuff I've only used it twice, so I haven't got a clue how much to put in. So it's going to get like one granule. Let's see what happens. Right. So that's got us up to 74. Happy with that? So far, so good. So that's two of the ingredients. Now what we've done now is, bearing in mind the difference between those two TDS levels, in that bit that I've added in, 24% calcium has been added and 18% nitrogen has been added on top of what was already there. Now what we've done is we've bumped up our nitrogen, we've bumped up our calcium higher than I would prefer, and we've left everything else behind. So now we need some Epsom salts, and I really don't know how much to put in, and it's stuck to my fingers. I thought my fingers were dry, but they're obviously not. So it's going to stick to my finger, I just as well do that. And look, there's just, that's it. That's all that's there. Just a few grains stuck to my finger. Now that could be too much, I don't know. But what I'm doing now is trying to bring the magnesium up behind. And I want to go from 74 to something like 90, no more than that, yeah? Because with the Epsom salts, there's actually quite a high percentage of magnesium in there, 16%, but what I don't like is the 30 odd percent of sulfur, so I don't want to add much of this. And let's see what that's done. That was just a couple of grains stuck to my finger. It may have made no difference at all. As I said, I haven't used this stuff, so I don't know how strong it is. Well, that's gone from 74, does that say 80 or? Yeah, it says 80. So that went from 74 to 80. I want it higher than that, so we'll dip my finger in again and get a few more grains stuck and add a little bit more. Okay, and that's probably going to do it. So we'll do the bag back up, I think, on the grounds that any moisture that gets in there is not going to do it any good at all. Reseal that. Right, how are we doing now? 85 perhaps, maybe 90. 86. That'll do. Because unfortunately there's still something else to go in here, because what we will have now is probably a ridiculously low pH. Interesting. Which one of these elements then has bumped that up? Right, so we might not have to adjust this. Ideally, I would like this at 5.8. That is the recommendation. These take a little while to register these things. Well, it's around somewhere between 5.9 and 6. I'm happy with that, and that's with no adjustments, because this is what I use for pH up. Yeah, potassium, well, potassium silicate. I'm not so sure that would be such a good idea now if it's got potassium as a basis, but it only normally needs a little bit. So I'm going to leave that as that. I've got to rinse that. This doesn't ever get rinsed, it just gets put away. But I will give that a rinse in some clean water before I pack it away. Right, get everything out of the way so that I can sort of say really what comes next, what I'm up to. Everything out of the way. Right, there we go. So that amount of water that I put in there is the amount of water I use to spray the mounts. And depending on whether I spray the Vanda roots as well, and I might put a bit on the top of the Cattleya pots as well, it depends, but there's enough there to do the mounts. And the overall TDS of what's going on those plants is 85 parts per million. Yeah, that's a very low level feed. So that's what's going to happen. I won't bother filming spraying it. I just I said that when I mix this up, I will show it. Not accurate, not by any means, not scientific, yeah? But what I know I've done is, from my base point with the MSU fertiliser, I know that I've bumped up the nitrogen and the calcium, and by doing so I've left the potassium and everything else behind. So I, then added my calcium nitrate to bump up that nitrogen and calcium. The calcium would have gone up higher than I really wanted, but I'm stuck with that at the moment. And then we put some Epsom salts in to bring the magnesium up behind. Very unscientific. All I know is that the balance of the percentages of what's in this mix now has got a higher nitrogen, calcium and magnesium than it would have had if I hadn't done it. That's about as scientific as we can get. But I've probably doubled the amount of nitrogen, yeah, and at least doubled the amount of calcium, and probably doubled the amount of magnesium. So that's where we are. So and you have to bear in mind, these mounts that are about to get fed have had no food for 2 weeks. So this is their first food. All they've had is clean water. So this is their first feed. And this is the start of trying out the change of the balance of the elements in my feed for my mounted epiphytic orchids. End of story at this point. See you next time.